first thing that I want to tell you guys is that there is no, as everything in system engineer, there is no a message in the stone. Okay, so you can do whatever you want. Everything is under discussions. So there is no real, there is no correct way to do this. It's on your own. What I will show in this call is just the way I did and why I reached the conclusions and why I use the method that I use. That's it. But it's a personal thing. It's just like your underwear. It's up to you. You can pick wherever you want. Okay. Saying that, I will share my screen. Oh, wait a minute, because here I'm getting, I have a, wait a minute, I have a security problem here to share my screen. Okay, so, okay, okay, perfect. Later. Oh, I need to close Zoom and open it again because Mac is telling me that. So I will cut the connection and I will start again. Sorry, guys.
Sure. We will be here, Maxi. Don't worry.
Hi guys, are you watching my desktop?
Yes.
Great. So these are the guidelines that I wrote. First of all tests should run without your internet connection. Why? Because if you need to access to a remote site to run your test will be slow. And the idea of having tests is that those tests should run very quick, very fast in your local machine. And if you need to execute a request to a remote API of any kind, for example, Amazon or Firebase or Ethereum, the library that I'm working on now, you waste a lot of time waiting, and the idea of the test should be to run them quickly. So in order to do this, what I recommend is use Docker as crazy. Dockerize everything. You can actually, in the web, you have Docker containers for everything that you want. So use Docker and configure it in order to have your database, Redis, Amazon. Amazon have a beautiful image called local stack that lets you run tests against Amazon locally. And configure Docker to run all the suite against that Docker. So this is what I recommend because it saves a lot of time. And another very important thing, when your project run the test on a continuum iteration environment, you save time to your DevOps because you can give to your DevOps your Docker compose file and tell to him, okay, this is the configuration. You can start that Docker in your environment and the test will run with this. You will save time to your DevOps and you will save time to yourself. Okay, the second thing is you should configure your suite to let you run a single test easily. And a suite, when I say a suite, I mean a group of tests in the same class. For example, take a look on this. Here, I'm running a single test, not the entire suite, just a test. It's pretty difficult to configure this using Mocha, but it's possible. So you need to add an environment variable and writing a string, and in that string, match the string with the comment of the IT method in Mocha, for example. Okay. This is very important because to save time, to avoid running the entire suite, what you do is just run one test, one test, one test. When you finish the functionality in one class, for example, here I was running a single test. Okay. For example, get configuration. I will show you. And when you finish your actual test and you want to run the test of your class, you can define another environment variable and run all the tests in that class. It takes time because I'm using TypeScript and compiling with suite to run, and compiling with TypeScript and Nest in particular takes time to begin. After begins, it runs very fast, but it takes some time to hit the engine. Okay, so I run 3 tests, all the tests in the class. Okay, this saves time. It's not a big deal. It's very easy to configure and it saves time. 3. This is something that we can discuss, but I will expose my opinion. In my case, in particular, I hate mocking. I hate that because mocks are not the real thing, right? So in my case, I try to minimize all the mocks that I can. In this project in particular, I have no choice because I'm using a remote server called OpenSea, and OpenSea interaction is pretty slow. So what I did in this project in particular is use, I will show you. I have two sets of variables here, which are running against mocks in my local machine, and here, which I'm using the remote services. Okay, it are the same variables, but in one case I hit against localhost and I'm using the mocks here, and here I'm using the real server. And in the code, I just added a very stupid and simple thing, which is a provider. And here, depending of the variable, on the variable ethernet provider host, if it has the string localhost, I run the mocks. And if that not contain the word localhost, I'm using the real API. So what I do is run all day the mocks, and 1 time a day or 2 times a day, I change the variables here and I hit the real services. But I usually, in all my projects, I use the real services, but OpenSea don't have a mocker container. That's why I had to run those mocks. What else? Yeah, this is a very important thing. Sometimes you have an application that have different roles, right? My suggestion is to, in your suite test, create a test user for every role and develop test APIs to work with that roles in particular. I will show you. For example, here, in this case, to update the configuration of the application, you must to be an admin user. So I created a method called HTTP admin get, and you have another one saying HTTP user get, which is not an admin, and you have another one called HTTP get with token ID. And this token is the bearer token. So I can execute the integration test using the admin user, a plain old-fashioned user, and some specific user that I created in my test. For example, in some tests, I'm creating a user and I'm getting the token ID, the GWT token of that user, and invoke the test using that user in particular. I will show you in the material tests. Yeah, here. as you can see in this test, I need a new user. So I create a test, and in the test creation, I have the ID of the GWT token, and every time I need to invoke the API, I can send the ID token here, right? In these methods, I'm using the admin user because I'm creating some specific stuff that need to be created by the admin. But here I create a user and I send the ID token, the GWT token here. So because of this, your test will be atomic because you will be creating everything in your workflow from scratch. You will not use the information existing in the database. You will create everything from scratch. And you need to prepare your infrastructure in order to support those kind of things.
Maxi,
you can make me questions. Yeah.
I have a question on that. So you have a seed that you run before the test?
I have two things. Yeah, it's a very smart question. Here, I'm wait a minute, I'm using the interface. Where is this crap? Oh, I forget. Oh, I don't remember what is that. But basically, I have two things. I have to define, I will show you the seeds. I have two users. The admin feature, the admin user, and the old-fashioned user. Can't you see that I have the role admin and the role user? So I have two users pre-created, and most of the time I use this user or this user. When I start the test, I create a fake GWT token for both of them. I can't find where I do this, right? And it's normally it's okay. Here it's here. Okay, here. Here, what I do is when I start my suite test, I get those users from the database, and I add to the session, to the ready session, 3 tokens, one for the admin user and another for the user. Those GWT tokens are fake. In the normal cases, when I execute to create an admin thing or a user thing, that's fine, that's enough. But in some cases, like I show here in the material test, I need to create everything from scratch. In that case, I create a new user and I get the GWT token from the session. But only in that case. Normally with this, I get the user, I create a GWT session, I add that session in Redis, and that's it. I can run all my tests with that. But in some specific case, I create a user manually here. I can't remember what it is.
Do you add it to Redis to be able to read it very fast, or why?
No, yeah, because in this project I added Redis because I need to maintain the sessions in memory. And every time the user hits the API, the backend, instead of going to the database and checking if the user is valid, I get information from Redis and I mark the token expire every 5 minutes. So every 5 minutes, I create a new token. But that's the case in this project in particular because we are using Firebase to validate. But in other projects, it's different. But almost in every project, you have roles, right? Different roles with different permissions. So in order to do this, I just do what I show you here. I get the tokens, I get the user from the database, and I create a fake token, and that's it. I go for it, right? It's very easy to use because as you can see here, I use HTTP, admin post, admin get, admin put, user get, user post. It's very easy and your tests look very nice. You don't realize anything of this. You just use a different verb to execute your endpoint, and that's it.
Very nice.
Okay.
Maxi, I have a question. Why you are taking that road instead of creating the user with user and password and log it in the test?
Yeah, because I'm not using in this case. We are using an OAuth server, so we are not managing user and password. The authentication of the application is not in our charge. We have an OAuth server, and that server manage the authentication. Okay, that's why I don't have any user and passwords here.
Okay. And to run offline, you need to manage in that way, because otherwise you need to have the auth server running into your computer.
No, because I'm creating the GWT tokens. Where is the code? Yeah, and here I'm emulating, because I'm adding the GWT tokens directly to Redis. So in the normal workflow, when you try to authenticate, you go to the auth server, and when you return of the auth server, you add the credentials in your Redis, your GWT token, correct? But in this case, I'm injecting the GWT tokens directly to Redis, emulating that I went to the auth server and I came back and everything is fine. So these users for me are logged in and valid. Okay.
Okay, good. Yeah, understood.
Yeah, but I cannot test directly to the auth server the authentication, because two things. First, I don't want to make my test slow, hitting the auth server all the time, right? And second, I need to save a username and password in the database here in the seeds in order to let my application to validate to that server. And I don't like to save username and password here, because I need to push this to GitHub, and it's a security risk, right? So basically, I assume, and there's another reason. I don't want to test if the auth server do the job correctly, because it's not my job. In my test, I don't test if the database works fine, or Redis works fine, or the auth server works fine, because I assume that those will work fine because other programmers took care of that. In my test, what I test is that my application works fine. So I thought that some programmers wants to test those kind of things, and that's not what I want, because I assume that Postgres will work fine, I assume that Redis will work fine, and I assume the OAuth server will work fine too. So I don't want to test that. But that's an opinion. You can, in fact, in my former project, we had tests against the OAuth server authentication. I didn't do that in that project, but the programmer in the former project that I worked made those tests, wrote those tests against the OAuth server. I don't know if I answer your question.
Yeah, really clear. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, this is my opinion again, because I don't like to write unit tests, because for me, writing integration test is just this very stupid thing. And it's the same job for me to write a unit test or an integration test. It's the same job. And if I run if I create the integration test, I can test the complete workflow of a request instead of testing the functionality of the service, right? It's the same job, because writing a unit test is just like this. It's the same thing, right? It's the same job, and I'm testing everything in one shot. So, and I'm testing the DTOs, I'm testing the permissions, I'm testing the transaction, I'm testing a lot of things in one shot, writing the same code. So why I should use unit test? For example, take a look on this. Here, I want to test different conditions in the server depending of the input, right? In this case, I should write 4 different unit tests, because I'm testing different conditions. But here, okay, with different parameters to play if the application, the behavior of the application is correct. And the response, the HTTP response that I'm getting from the server is the HTTP response that I want. In this case, I should write 4 different unit tests with different parameters. But for me, writing 4 unit tests or writing this is the same. It's the same. So in my opinion, there are a few cases where writing a unit test is valid. It's an opinion, so you can think whatever you want and you can write all the unit tests that you want. But for me, a test is a test where I validate it, that the transactions are working correctly, the DTOs are validated correctly, the permissions are working the way I want, okay? Everything in one shot, but that's an opinion. And one important thing, if you're working with Java or Python or JavaScript, configuring your environment to run integration test, it's very easy. So there is no reason. When I start working with Java, Spring was very basic in that moment, and configuring the environment to write an integration test was a piece of work, because you need to start manually a Tomcat or a Jetty and configure everything from scratch in a huge configuration file. So it was a piece of work. In that moment, writing a unit test was a valid option. But now, with Spring, you can write an integration test in one line. With JavaScript, you can write an integration test in one line. So I think that there is no real reason to write unit tests, but that's an opinion. Okay. Yeah, this run, don't be lazy and add in your package JSON here, writing integration test in this running coverage is just configuring Mocha. Well, here it's just configuring Mocha. Sorry, NIC. It's just configuring this to run the coverage. It's just adding a line in your package file, in your package JSON file. So don't be lazy, add this line and run the test, the coverage every 1 week or 2 in order to see where you sit on. This is the result, it's beautiful, and you can see your coverage and you can detect all the conditions that you are not testing. You don't need to do this every day because it's crazy, but 1 time a week, 2 times a week, you can run your coverage and say, okay, why I have this, and take a look and see and say, okay, can I test this? It's difficult to test, it's valid, do I need to, or it's okay? Every 2 weeks, don't be lazy, just enter and see the coverage of your project, okay? Because it's not a big deal, and configuring the coverage is very stupid. Yeah, this is a very important thing. Sometimes I saw some tests written for other persons or me that make you, that if you run the test in a specific order and you change the order, something is breaking because the test here needs something that this test wrote. Okay, this is horrible because your tests are have a coupling between them, and that's not correct. You need to, if you know that your suite test is fine when you can run a single test or a suite or the entire suite with no orders in the wherever you want, you can run this test several times without getting an error saying, okay, I need that information that the previous test saved or the next test. So in order to do this, you need to create all the data that your suite, that your test needs in that test. Okay, you need to create everything in the test that you are running, because if you depend on some former test, you are in problem. Of course, it doesn't mean that you need to write everything in the test. For example, here, here, in order to make, this is the endpoint that I'm testing. But in order to run this test, this endpoint, I need to create a user, I need to create a material, I need to create a category. So you can inject the other test here in order to create what you need in order to provide the DTO information to run this test, right? So I'm not saying that you cannot reuse the code of the test. Of course, you have to, and it's okay. But what you should not do is depend of another test to run this, for example. You need to create everything here using the other integration test that you already wrote, right? Like a puzzle, okay, using parts. This is very important. This is very important. Okay.
I have a question, Maxi. Do
Yeah,
you, in the tear down of the test, when you are finishing up, do you delete what you created?
No,
before
no,
running the
no,
test, or
no,
you keep-
no, because I'm creating everything in every test. So yeah, my test database is growing up all the time until I erase it. But it's okay because I want my test database get bigger and bigger and bigger because I'm testing the performance too. Imagine this. Imagine that you run the test for 3 days, like I do, and in the 4th day or 5th day, you see that your tests are getting slow. You have a problem. You have an architectural problem because the performance of your application should not depend of the amount of information that you have in your database, correct? So if I run this test, my suite test for 1 week or 2, without deleting the database, and my tests start to be to run slow, so I need to run the slow test and see which is the problem. So what I recommend is not deleting the information, not deleting the test, not deleting, and use the same database all the time in order to see the performance. It's a benefit that you have without moving a finger. Okay.
Makes a lot of sense.
No, it's okay. Yeah. Use test decorators. I don't know why in Java we used to use the annotations all the time, and in the project that use TypeScript, I don't see the guys using a lot of decorators. I encourage you to use decorators because they are great. In this case, I wrote the test decorators for the test suite and test decorator for every single test. Yeah, look at this. It's very nice. Instead of having Mocha huge amount of code with all the it, you can write a new class, write the suite here, write the test here, and add the file here, and you have a test. I will show you. I was the Maxi, a new test. Maxi test. Okay, that's my name. In the Maxi test, I will call the class Maxi test. Maxi suite, create Maxi. And now okay, and now I run this test. That's it. This is a time that you need to write. You create a new endpoint called Maxi controller, Maxi service, and writing a suite for that endpoint in place that job. I'm alive. Take a look on this. Create Maxi. 2 seconds, no more than that. And here you can start creating, and you have your own class for your own controller, your own service, totally decoupled of the rest of the application. And in fact, you can inject here other tests, and you can use them. This is, in my opinion, it's a rock star. Okay, So, and of course, take a look on this, and this is something that it's related to the architecture. It's not related to the code, but I'm a fan of the decorators. So here I'm using I'm validating that the user is connected. Okay, here I'm creating a database transaction. Okay, here I'm populating the information to Swagger. Here I'm saying that I should return a HTTP 200. Okay, here it's the endpoint URL. And here I'm saying that I will receive a file in an uploaded file. Okay, take a look on this. This code is very decoupled, very decoupled. So adding decorators using JavaScript, it's awesome for me. So I recommend to use decorators all the time, and you can write your own decorators like I did here with the test, because these are mine. I wrote this, but there are some libraries that you can use Mocha with decorators, so you can try your own, and I recommend this strongly. Okay, yeah. Sometimes I don't know why I see that the users, the developers use the same database for test and for dev. I don't understand that idea, but I discourage it. I don't know to say that. I discourage that idea. You should have two different databases, and you should run the migrations, the seeds, and the rollback in both databases. Here, if I want to delete my test database, run db rollback test. Here, I'm deleting my test database. Here, I'm creating the data, the tables and the indexes, and here I'm running the seeds. Yeah, I use the prefix test. Yeah, and in order to do with the dev database, I just write rollback, pling, and that's it. I'm using the dev database. How I do this? I have two different M files, one for dev and one for test. Yeah, and in your package, you always need to use which M you will use. For the test, you write nodem test. In the migrations, can you see here it's a db migrate, nodem, no test, nodem, no test. Adding that variable in the package lets you have the same application with no ifs, saying, okay, if I'm this, do this, if I'm there, do that. Okay, it's very easy to configure. All of you knows how to do this, and I recommend you to do this instead of having just one file, because I work in a project that have the dev variables and the test variables in the same file, adding a suffix called _test. Horrible. Thanks God that programmer is not in this call, because I hate that. Okay, I hate that. Adding a suffix test on the properties is horrible, and that's not an opinion. It's horrible. You should not do that. Okay, very few. Please, this is what I was saying. Please don't add if I'm running it in your code. If I'm running a test, do this, and if I'm not running a test, do that, because all the tests should be realistic. And what I'm saying is that if your test is realistic, you should not add condition saying, if I'm in environment, do this, and if I'm not, do that. The test should be the same for the test and for the real application running. The same code. You should not add, if I'm in test, do this, and if I'm not, do that. In that project, because the _test variables, I should do that. I did that all the time, and was horrible, because on continuum integration, configuring that project was horrible. And in continuum integration, I used to have both group of variables for testing and not testing in the same M file. Horrible. The latest thing, okay, in order, you have libraries like Factory Girl. I don't know if you read about Factory Girl.
I have worked with it.
Okay, Factory Girl lets you create records in the database, in the tables, very easily. With Factory Girl, you can define, okay, I want to save a record in this table with that information, and Factory Girl gives you the information of you save in your test in order to let you test the application. Okay, imagine that I need to create a user. What I'm doing in my code is invoking the API to create a test. I'm invoking here, I need to create a category. Here, to create a category, I'm invoking the remote service, the API, to create a new category. Using Factory Girl, you can do something like this, for example. Await Factory Girl, create category. Something like that. Okay.
What you are saying, Max, is that whatever you create it in the way that the application is designed.
Yeah, exactly. Because this is not using your endpoint. This is not using your DTOs. This is not validated at all. You are just inserting a record in database and you are getting that record to do this. It's very tempting to use this because it's easier. Okay, it's faster and it's have a nice taste. Okay, but in the end of the day, it's a problem. It's a problem. So if you need to create a record, if you need to create something, use the endpoint that you create, that you coded to do that, instead of using these libraries. But using Faker, it's okay, because here I need to create a new category, and Faker, it's a very nice library to create information. If I need to create a category name, I use that library because it let me create fake name, fake credit numbers, fake Ethereum address, fake words, fake test, and it's very nice. So I recommend to use Faker because it's very nice. Instead of hard coding the category name, you can use the library, and the library will give you a random name and you can use it. In fact, you can create numbers in a range. You can create a lot of stuff, dates, future date, past dates. It's a wonderful library to create these kind of things. And those are the test tips and tricks. And here I have some quality requirements that I think that every project should have. But again, this is an opinion. The first thing is database transactions. I saw a lot of projects that you are not managing the database transaction on every request. So if you have a request that executes 3 inserts in the database and the third one fails, you are not rollbacking the first 2 statements. So I recommend you, please, to create a transaction on every request on the server that you are hitting. You can use a decorator, like I did. The decorator is this guy called transactional. Here creates a database transaction. Here you execute a begin transaction when you enter to the method, and a commit and a rollback if the endpoint finish fine or gets an error. Our job, in my opinion, is to create applications that have data which are valid and secure and consistent. If we don't manage database transaction and you get an error in an endpoint, your database start having crappy information that you have to delete in some moment. So adding a transaction, it's very easy. And in fact, I have examples in Express. I showed you that 2 years ago, Fabrizio, do you remember that I worked in Express 2 years ago and I created the code? So if you need to create a database transaction using Express, you can ask me for the code and I have in some place in there. And you will not have to change your application at all. It's just adding a stupid piece of code in your root section and that's it. Very stupid, very easy thing to do. But I recommend this because our job is to create application with validated information inside it. in the database. Okay. Second, right? It's a word, but please add logins in your application with different levels. In every programming language, you have libraries to write logins, and it's nice. Take a look on this. You can configure in your M file your log level. Okay, you can use the library that you want. All the libraries now let you write beautiful tests with no work. And when you run the test in dev or in production, having the test is very easy to you to see which is the problem. Because if you are a Java programmer, the stack trace is pretty easy to understand. But with JavaScript, the stack that JavaScript shows you to you, it's impossible to understand. It's a crap. So you need the test to see what's going on. This is an opinion, but it's a very easy thing to do. It will help your coworkers, because if you have a new resource that doesn't understand the application, he will see the latest message before the exception, and he can copy, he can search the code, and he will say, okay, the error was here in this section. Okay.
Which library do you like using for
I use Winston. Winston is Winston is great because it's very easy to program, and it has connector to everything. So if you have if you need to send your exceptions to your login via TCP to another site, you can do that. If you need to save the log in your database, you can do that. If you need to add that to Elasticsearch, for example, you can do that. You have connectors to let you send your logs to everywhere. Everywhere. If you need to write a circular file, it's very easy too, because you have some plugins that let you send your logs wherever you want. And in fact, adding log, not just because the errors, it's because your new coworkers, they start the project, and when they see the log, they can see what are you doing on every place of your code. And it's nice. Instead of writing comments, you can write a log message. It's the same work. It's the same work to add this, checking if token is valid, that adding a log. It doesn't work, right? So add log messages, be nice, be cool. Swagger, you should configure Swagger in all your projects, because your API, your UI fellows will thank this, and it's not a work for you. If you use decorators, all you have to do is just add one decorator here and one decorator in your DTOs. This information is useful for you. It's very easy to understand, and your UI guys, your UI fellows will see all the endpoints and the properties of every, and it's just 2 seconds for you guys. So be nice, be cool, and when you start the project, the first thing that you should do is to add Swagger in order to let the rest of the world understand what you're doing. Okay, it's 5 minutes. There is no excuse. And if you want to add Swagger later, you need to enter to every endpoint and to every DTO and add all the properties. And that's a crap, and that's a piece of work. And I'm lazy. I do this in the beginning of the project because I'm too lazy to add all that information later. Yeah, migration for dev and test environment. I already showed you that you need to write all the commands of migration and seeds for testing and dev. And this is a very important thing. Validate the request using a library to validate the request. For example, I use class validator. In this method, I'm getting a material ID, and this material ID should be an UID. Okay, so adding this validates that the request is fine, and you don't need to write ifs in the code saying if this property is not null, if this property is not a string, if this property is not a number between this and this. Please, guys, if you add this, your code is horrible, your endpoints are huge, and you are doing a work that someone else did better than you, better than me, and all you need to do is just add a validation annotation in your code. Material, take a look at this. Take a look at this. Nice, stupid, simple. You just need to add the annotation of the class validator and the decorator of Swagger. But for you, it's just copy paste, copy paste, copy paste, copy paste, copy paste, and that's it. Your DTO, it's valid. You don't need to write code in your endpoint, validating it. Okay, and if you need to add regular expressions or some funny thing, it's very easy too. In fact, I wrote, let me remember where, here. Wait a minute. Oh, I forget. I did that yesterday and I forget. But I added a decorator to validate time. It's very simple. What else? Yeah, another thing. Please, I usually see that in your SQL files when you are creating a table, you are just validating that the unique key is unique and that's it. The database is your last defense against the bad data. The database is your latest night before the chaos. So waste 2 seconds and add all the constraints that you want that you need in the database. If you know that a field should have 3 different values, please add a constraint. It's 2 seconds. If you think that a field should be unique, add a constraint. It's 2 seconds for you, and that can save your butt in the future, because if you write invalid information, you need to write a process later to fix that information, and it's very annoying to write processes to correct information, right? So please, it's not a big deal for you. It's very easy. Add constraints. Add all the constraints that you want when you're creating the database. When you're creating the table, add the constraint, add the foreign keys. Okay, add that crap, because it's important. Okay, take a look on this. Here in fact, I show you the test. Do you remember that I had 3 lines of test using different booleans: true, false, true, true, false, true, false, false? I'm validating that here too, because I don't trust in myself. If I committed a mistake in the test or in the DTOs, the database should give me a message saying, okay, you have an error. So add constraint too. It's 2 seconds. Here's another constraint. 2 seconds. Add a check condition in the database is a stupid thing. All of you knows how to do that. And you are protecting your application, and you are protecting yourself. You are protecting your butt. And it's always a good idea to protect your butt, right? Yeah, another thing. If you're writing JavaScript with JavaScript, please, first, you should use TypeScript. And second, you should configure your lint parameters as strict as you can in order to prevent problems in the future, because JavaScript is not a safe language like Java. So in an object with some type, you can say whatever you want, and the compiler will not complain, and the runtime will not complain, and you will have an error. So when you begin the project, add all the restrictions that you can in your TypeScript in order to prevent problems in the future. Okay. For example, I don't allow any types in my project. I don't allow to have any variable with any type. You should define a type for every variable. It's a stupid thing, but it lets your application be secure, because in JavaScript you have no guarantees. So you need to, in my opinion, all the projects should have a linter configured with very strict rules in the beginning of the project, and a prettier, because every time you you commit, you merge. If your coworkers and you have different configuration in your IDE tool, like VS Code, you will have spacings and new lines and tabs, and it's horrible. So at the beginning of the project, you should configure the transactions, the login, Swagger, migrations, and the linter before writing a single line of code. And that's it. I thought that I would take 15 minutes and it took almost an hour. So, and that's it. Any questions, any comments?
Regarding the point on using types, not any, right? I've seen that a lot, that a project starts, everyone starts creating the types, and then they become lazy and start using any. So you add a rule on your linting that will fail if you put any.
Yeah. In fact, before merging, before sending a PR, I run npm run lint and npm run build. These rules that I wrote navigate the entire project, all the source code, and validate the linting and change the code in order to make that work with whatever. So here in the class that I wrote, for example, I have an error. I have the variable logger that it's not being used. If I enter to this, I will see that the logger variable is
right.
Not being
You
used.
use console log instead of logger, and
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah. If I remove the variable and I run the suite again, it will complain that I'm importing things that I don't need. These things should be in the continuum integration server. Before merging, it should run this and fire an exception.
Mm-hmm. Do you recommend also putting coverage checking in the CI?
Of course. But it's a dream for me because I've been working for 15 years writing coverage, and not in a single company I had a DevOps that configured the continuum integration server to reject a PR if the test coverage percentage was low, decreased.
No, you
didn't find
need
that.
to ask for that usually.
Yeah, no, believe me, I did, and I'm very annoying guy, so I push, but no success. So it's up to you.
Very good. And
I recommend 90% at least of coverage, not 70, not 80, at least 90%. There are some packages that you should not test. For example, I exclude here I can't remember the name.
RC.
Here, I excluded these packages because testing, I cannot run the coverage in the migration scripts because in the helpers, I cannot, because the helpers, they are just DTOs with the configuration. In the main, not, because when I run the test, I'm not running the main because the main start the application and I'm not starting the application. And here, because I'm mocking the connectors here because I don't have OpenC in my local machine. But you usually, you should add here the packages that has sense not to have coverage and coverage all the rest. Okay, but all the things that I told you guys, database transaction, login, Swagger, migrations, constraints, and linting should be done before you write a single line of code. You should take 1 day to do this. 1 day. In 1 day is enough, and will let you sleep like a baby. And that's all from my side. Any more questions? No? Okay. Cool. That's it then.
Thanks a lot, Maxi.
No problem. Bye-bye. Have a nice weekend, guys.
Likewise. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.